She sent a love letter to the wrong address. He was a lonely millionaire waiting for love. Hi, my very, very beautiful and loyal family. How are you? God bless every single one of you. Today, I have a very beautiful prayer for my beautiful sisters, and a very heart-touching and loving prayer for my entire beautiful family. Before we go further, let's pause for a moment of love and prayer. Dear God, bless my beautiful sisters and my beautiful family. Fill their hearts with peace, their days with joy, and their nights with sweet rest. Protect them, guide them, and remind them how deeply they are loved. Thank you for their loyalty, their kindness, and their beautiful souls. Keep them safe, happy, and forever close to you. Amen. Now, my beautiful family, let's do a little loyalty test. Can you tell me, what is my wife's name? Comment it below. Let's see who truly remembers. And don't forget, if I touched your heart today, if I satisfied your soul even a little bit, like and comment on this video. Your love and support mean the world to me. Let's continue this journey with love. The misplaced letter, June 1972. Lightning cracked across the darkened sky, illuminating Annabelle Cullo's small apartment in sudden electric clarity. Marvin Gaye's voice drifted from her record player, the gentle rhythm of "What's Going On?", a counterpoint to the storm raging outside. Rain lashed against the windows as she sat at her worn writing desk, a single lamp casting warm amber light over her delicate stationery. The newspaper on her coffee table announced the latest civil rights demonstration in stark black headlines. Another day, another battle for dignity. Annabelle had read it twice, finding both hope and heartache in the slow march of progress. But tonight, her mind was occupied with a more personal revolution. She dipped her fountain pen into the inkwell, deliberately choosing handwritten intimacy over the typewriter that sat unused in the corner. Her fingers trembled slightly as the nib touched the cream-colored paper. 3 crumpled attempts already filled her wastebasket, each too timid, too proper, too unlike the churning emotions within her breast. "Be brave," she whispered to herself, echoing her grandmother's lifelong counsel. At 27, Annabelle had spent too many years choosing caution over courage. Tonight would be different. Dear Julian, I've held these words inside for too long, letting them burn through me like a slow fire. Every day I see you at the library, every moment our eyes meet across the reading room. The flame grows stronger until I can scarcely breathe with wanting you. When you placed that copy of Elizabeth Barrett Browning in my hands yesterday, did you feel the electricity between us? Did you notice how my fingers lingered against yours, unwilling to break that brief connection? Or am I alone in this current that pulls me toward you, relentless as the tide? I dream of your voice reading poetry in the quiet corners of the stacks, but in my dreams, your words are meant only for me. I imagine your hands, those careful hands that treat rare books with such reverence, tracing the curve of my cheek, the line of my neck, teaching me what it means to be touched by someone who sees beyond surfaces. The record ended, crackling softly as the needle reached its conclusion. Annabelle rose to flip it over, catching her reflection in the window. Her full lips parted slightly, her amber eyes bright with emotion, her dark curls framing her face like a halo. For a moment, she barely recognized herself. Was this what passion did to a person? Transform them from within? She returned to her letter, her pen moving more confidently now as she allowed her true self to emerge on paper. Perhaps I'm a fool for exposing my heart this way. Society tells women to be demure, to wait to be chosen, but I've watched my mother die with her deepest desires unspoken, and I promised myself I would never let fear silence me. So here is my truth, Julian. I want you, not just for a moment or a season, but for all the complex, beautiful, difficult moments that make up a life shared. If you feel even a fraction of what I feel when our eyes meet across the poetry section, come find me. I'll be waiting. Forever yours, Annabelle. She read over her words, heat rising to her cheeks at her own boldness. The letter revealed not just desire, but her deepest longing to be truly seen, to connect soul to soul with someone who understood the power of words and emotions. Would Julian recognize the gift she was offering, or would he recoil from such naked vulnerability? On her bookshelf, volumes of Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, and Zora Neale Hurston stood alongside the complete works of Shakespeare and Jane Austen, evidence of a mind that devoured words, seeking understanding across boundaries of time and experience. Books had been her refuge since childhood, her escape from a world that often had little place for a sensitive black girl with dreams beyond her circumstances. Carefully, Annabelle folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope. She addressed it with deliberate strokes. Julian Morris, apartment 1507, Westview Heights. The act felt ceremonial somehow, as if she was sending not just paper and ink, but pieces of her very soul out into the world. Morning came with clearing skies and momentary courage. Annabelle walked to the corner mailbox, letter tucked inside her raincoat, protected against her heart. The simple blue metal box stood like a sentinel, awaiting her decision. For a moment she hesitated. Once mailed, the words could not be recalled. The vulnerability could not be resealed and hidden away again. Was she ready for Julian's response, whatever it might be? Life doesn't reward those who hide their hearts, her grandmother had told her after her mother's funeral, dark eyes wise with years of both joy and sorrow. The memory strengthened her resolve. With a deep breath, Annabelle slipped the envelope through the slot. The metallic clank as it fell inside sounded impossibly final, like a door closing or perhaps opening on her future. As she turned to leave, a sensation washed over her unlike anything she had experienced before. It wasn't the relief she had expected, but something electric and unsettling. It felt like the moment in childhood when she'd leapt from the high dive for the first time, the suspended breath before gravity took hold. Something significant had just been set in motion, and there would be no calling it back. Oscar Samuel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching lightning fracture the night sky. The storm matched his mood, turbulent, charged, unpredictable. He'd loosened his tie hours ago, the constraints of the day finally shed, yet tension still coiled within him like a spring wound too tight. Today, he had fired Thomas Whitaker, his business partner of 5 years, and the closest thing he had to a friend. The evidence of embezzlement had been incontrovertible, ledgers falsified, funds diverted, trust betrayed. Oscar had confronted him directly, watched the man's face crumble from denial to shame, then had security escort him from the building. Another person proving his father right. Trust makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability is weakness. At 34, Oscar had built Samuel Industries into one of the country's most successful black-owned manufacturing companies. His face appeared in business magazines, his name whispered in boardrooms with respect and sometimes fear. He had overcome every barrier placed before him: racism, classism, the legacy of his father's abandonment, the memory of his mother walking away when he was 8. He had everything success promised. Everything except someone to share it with. "Will you be needing anything else tonight, Mr. Samuel?" Mrs. Collins asked from the doorway, her voice interrupting his thoughts. "No, thank you," Oscar replied, his deep voice betraying none of the emptiness he felt. "You can go home early." After she left, he poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and returned to the window. Beyond the glass, the city sprawled before him, a tapestry of lights and shadows. Each light represented lives being lived, families gathered around dinner tables, lovers embracing after time apart. all things that existed only in his imagination. Earlier that day, he'd passed a couple in the park, a young man and woman sharing an umbrella, laughing as they splashed through puddles. The simple joy on their faces had struck him like a physical blow. When was the last time he had laughed like that? Had he ever? Oscar took a sip of bourbon, letting the liquor burn a path down his throat. The storm was moving east, revealing patches of star-strewn sky in its wake. Tomorrow would bring another day of decisions, negotiations, the endless chess game of business, another day of success without satisfaction. The mail sat neatly stacked on the marble countertop where Mrs. Collins always left it. Bills to be paid, without a second thought. Invitations to charity galas where he would be paraded as a success story. Business propositions from people who saw him only as a stepping stone or a checkbook. He flipped through them mechanically until his fingers froze on a cream-colored envelope. The handwriting was distinctly feminine, flowing with artistic flourishes. It was addressed to apartment 1507, Westview Heights. His apartment was 1507, but at Skyline Tower, not Westview Heights. Something about the letter made him pause. In his world of typed business correspondence and formal communications, the handwritten address seemed startlingly intimate. He could almost feel the personality behind the pen strokes, confident yet somehow vulnerable. The postal worker had clearly misdelivered it. He should set it aside, have Mrs. Collins return it tomorrow marked wrong address. Instead, he found himself sliding his finger under the seal and carefully opening it. Dear Julian, he should stop reading immediately. This was clearly private correspondence, not meant for his eyes. But something in the opening line, the raw emotion already evident, pulled him forward against his better judgment. I've held these words inside for too long, letting them burn through me like a slow fire. Oscar sank into his leather armchair, bourbon forgotten. The letter was like nothing he had ever read, passionate, poetic, achingly honest. This unknown woman wrote of desire without artifice, of longing without games. She described the way this Julian's voice affected her, how she imagined his touch would feel against her skin, how she dreamed of sharing not just physical connection, but the deeper intimacy of minds aligned. By the third page, Oscar realized he was breathing rapidly, his heart racing as if he had run miles. He felt flushed, his skin warm despite the air conditioning that kept the penthouse at a perfect 72 degrees. He hadn't felt this alive in years, perhaps ever. The letter awakened something primal in him, a hunger not just for physical intimacy, but for the kind of soul-bearing honesty this woman offered so bravely to her Julian. The final paragraph hit him like a physical blow, her words about refusing to let fear silence her resonating in chambers of his heart he'd long ago sealed shut. Her signature, "Forever yours, Annabelle," seemed to leap from the page with vitality and promise. "Annabelle," he whispered, testing the sound of her name in the quiet room. His finger traced the elegant script of her signature, feeling an inexplicable connection to this woman he had never met. This woman who had accidentally bared her soul to him instead of her intended. Lightning flashed again outside his window, illuminating his reflection in the glass. He hardly recognized himself, the controlled, composed businessman replaced by someone with flushed cheeks and bright eyes, someone awakened and disarmed by words meant for another. Oscar returned to his chair, reading the letter again more slowly, savoring each phrase, each admission, each poetic turn. By the time he finally set it down, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He hadn't stayed up all night since college, yet here he was, sleep forgotten, captivated by a stranger's heart, spilled onto paper. Carried the letter to his bedroom, carefully placing it in the drawer of his nightstand, next to the small, worn volume of poetry that had belonged to his mother, the only memento he had kept of her. As he finally lay down to sleep, Oscar realized he was smiling, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in his chest. For 3 days, the letter consumed his thoughts. He carried it with him in his breast pocket, the paper growing soft from repeated handling. During meetings, his mind would drift to Annabelle's words. What did she look like? What was her voice like when she spoke of passion? How could this Julian possibly deserve such raw, beautiful honesty? On the 3rd night, Oscar sat at his desk, not the imposing mahogany one in his home office, but a smaller writing table in his bedroom that had belonged to his grandmother, the only person who had ever truly loved him. He pulled out his personal stationery, cream-colored paper he had never used, embossed simply with his initials. His pen hovered above the page as doubt assailed him. This was madness. He should forget the letter, forget this Annabelle. This wasn't his world, raw emotion, poetic longings, hearts laid bare, and yet his normally controlled handwriting turned uncharacteristically emotional as the words finally came. Dear Annabelle, your letter arrived at my address by mistake. I am not Julian, and this is not Westview Heights. The postal carrier misdelivered your beautiful words to a stranger. I should have stopped reading the moment I realized the error. I did not. For that invasion of your privacy, I sincerely apologize. I write not just to correct this mistake, but because your words have haunted me since they arrived 3 days ago. In a lifetime of carefully constructed walls and measured responses, I have never encountered such naked honesty, such brave vulnerability. Your letter made me feel alive in a way I haven't in years, perhaps ever. It awakened something I've kept buried so deeply I'd forgotten it existed. I have no right to ask anything of you, but if you could find it in your heart to write again, not words of love for Julian, but perhaps words of understanding for a man who has forgotten how to feel, I would be forever grateful. With deepest respect, Oscar Samuel. He sealed the envelope before he could reconsider addressing it to the return address on her letter. Tomorrow, he would mail it himself rather than sending it with his business correspondence. As he placed the letter on his nightstand, Oscar realized his hands were trembling slightly. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something piercing through the numbness that had become his constant companion, something dangerous and beautiful. Chapter 2. An unexpected reply. The morning sun filtered through Annabelle's gauzy curtains, painting golden patterns across her modest apartment. She sorted through her mail with casual interest until her fingers touched an unfamiliar cream-colored envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, nothing like the simple stationery she used for her own letters. Her heart leapt at the masculine handwriting. Had Julian responded already? But the return address wasn't from Westview Heights. Instead, it came from Skyline Tower, that gleaming monument to success downtown where the city's elite resided. Annabelle sank into her reading chair, a hand-me-down from her grandmother that had comforted 3 generations of color women. She carefully opened the envelope with trembling fingers, unfolding a letter bearing embossed initials, O.S. Her stomach plummeted as she read the first paragraph. Heat crawled up her neck, settling in her cheeks like wildfire. Her letter, her vulnerable, passionate confession, had never reached Julian at all. Instead, it had fallen into a stranger's hands. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. Mortification washed over her in waves. She forced herself to continue reading, expecting mockery or perhaps lecherous comments. Instead, she found something unexpected, a response filled with honesty and surprising vulnerability. This man, Oscar Samuel, seemed genuinely moved by her words. His tone was respectful, almost reverent, as he described how her letter had awakened something in him. The records of Nina Simone she'd been playing fell silent, leaving the apartment quiet except for the pounding of her heart. She reread his letter, trying to understand who this Oscar Samuel might be. His name tugged at her memory. Annabelle moved to the small bookshelf where she kept old magazines. After a moment of searching, she pulled out a business publication her former roommate had left behind. There on page 27 was a profile of Oscar Samuel, founder and CEO of Samuel Industries. The photograph showed a striking black man with penetrating dark eyes and a serious expression that hinted at depths. Carefully guarded. "Of all the people," she murmured, studying his face. According to the article, he had built his company from nothing, overcoming significant barriers to become one of the most successful black businessmen in the city. Annabelle carried both, the magazine and letter, to her window seat, gazing out at the busy street below. Her initial mortification began to shift into something more complex. There was something almost poetic about this mistake. Her heartfelt words meant for one man had reached another who actually seemed to value their honesty. That afternoon at the library, Annabelle watched Julian chatting with Catherine, a new librarian, their heads bent close together over a cart of books. The intimacy of their posture told her everything she needed to know. Her letter, had it reached him, would have been an embarrassment, perhaps even a source of amusement between them. That evening she sat at her writing desk, Nina Simone's Four Women playing softly in the background. Before she could overthink it, she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "Dear Mr. Samuel, your letter arrived this morning and I hardly know how to respond. I'm thoroughly embarrassed that my personal correspondence found its way to you, but grateful for your discretion and kindness in the matter. There's no need to forward my original letter. I've since learned that the intended recipient is otherwise engaged romantically. The library reveals much about workplace relationships that remain officially unacknowledged. Your mention of your mother reciting Browning touched me. My own mother introduced me to those sonnets when I was 16. After she passed 5 years ago, I found myself returning to them like a lighthouse guiding me through grief. It's strange how powerful words on a page can be, how they connect us across time and circumstance. Perhaps there's a lesson here about words finding their true destinations, regardless of addresses. Sincerely, Annabelle Cullow. She read it over, satisfied that it maintained a proper tone while acknowledging the unexpected connection. After addressing the envelope, she walked to the corner mailbox, double-checking the address this time. As the letter disappeared into the box, Annabelle felt a strange flutter in her stomach, not embarrassment now, but something lighter, more anticipatory. She told herself it was simply the relief of handling an awkward situation gracefully, yet as she walked home, she found herself wondering what Oscar Samuel might be like beyond the serious, successful man in the magazine photograph. What kind of person was moved so deeply by a stranger's letter? Who was he when business suits were shed and masks lowered? Questions without answers, or so she thought. Oscar's secretary Margaret had worked for him for 7 years. In that time, she had never seen him distracted until today. Twice he had asked her to repeat information. 3 times she had caught him staring at the window rather than reviewing contracts. And most telling of all, he had checked his personal mail in the middle of the afternoon, something he normally saved for evenings at home. Oscar himself couldn't explain his distraction. 5 days had passed since he'd sent his response to Annabelle. 5 days of wondering if she would write back, if she would be horrified by his intrusion, if the brief connection he'd felt reading her words was entirely one-sided. When Margaret entered his office with the afternoon mail, his eyes immediately caught the cream-colored envelope on top of the stack. His name was written in the same neat handwriting he recognized from the misdelivered letter. "Thank you, Margaret," he said, keeping his voice neutral despite the sudden acceleration of his heartbeat. He waited until she left before picking up the envelope, turning it over in his hands with uncharacteristic hesitation. Her response was gracious, thoughtful, and affecting in ways he hadn't anticipated. The mention of her mother's death and how Browning's sonnets had guided her through grief resonated deeply. Oscar kept few mementos of his own mother, but her worn poetry book remained in his nightstand drawer, a connection to the time before she'd left. Most surprising was Annabelle's final comment about words finding their true destinations. Was there a hint of invitation there? Or was he projecting his own inexplicable desire to continue this unusual correspondence? Before he could reconsider, Oscar pulled out his personal stationery and began writing. Dear Miss Cullow, thank you for your gracious response to what must have been a mortifying situation. I'm sorry to hear about the intended recipient of your original letter. His loss, it seems to me. Your mention of your mother and Browning struck a chord. My mother left when I was 8, but her love of poetry remains one of my clearest memories of her. She would recite, "How do I love thee," while braiding my grandmother's hair on Sunday evenings, an image preserved in amber in my memory. It's curious how the things that wound us often become the things that sustain us. I rarely find myself discussing poetry these days. Business associates generally prefer profit margins to pentameter. If you wouldn't find it too forward, I'd welcome hearing which other poets speak to you. Respectfully, Oscar Samuel P.S. The cafe on Elm Street you mentioned in your original letter, is it Harlow's by chance? Their almond croissants have been a Sunday indulgence of mine for years. Oscar sealed the envelope, addressing it carefully. He hesitated before adding it to his outgoing mail tray. Was he overstepping? Probably, but something about this unexpected correspondence had awakened a part of himself he'd nearly forgotten. The part that valued connection beyond business and social obligation. As he returned to the contracts awaiting his review, Oscar found himself able to focus again, though thoughts of Annabelle Cullow and her love of poetry lingered at the edges of his mind. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to something unrelated to business success. The possibility of another letter in that distinctive handwriting, another glimpse into a mind that somehow seemed to understand his own unspoken loneliness. The following week found Annabelle hiding in the poetry section during her lunch break, Oscar's latest letter open in her hands. She'd read it 5 times since receiving it yesterday, each time noticing something new. The precise pressure of his pen on certain words, the thoughtful phrasing, the surprising admission about his mother, and that postscript about Harlow's Cafe. It wasn't just any reference, it suggested that they frequented the same places, moved through some of the same spaces despite their evidently different lives. In the 2 weeks since their correspondence began, they had exchanged 3 letters each. What had started as an embarrassing mistake had evolved into something Annabelle found herself eagerly anticipating. Oscar's letters were thoughtful and increasingly personal, revealing a man vastly different from what his public image suggested. Hiding from Julian again? Her colleague Diane whispered, peering around the bookshelf with knowing eyes. Annabelle quickly folded the letter. Just enjoying my lunch break. Diane hummed skeptically. Well, your admirer asked for you at the front desk. Left something for you. What? Who? Julian. He seemed quite pleased with himself. Annabelle's stomach tightened. After weeks of barely acknowledging her, Julian had suddenly begun paying attention to her again. Yesterday he'd complimented her new dress. Today, apparently, he'd left her something. At the front desk, she found a small paper bag with her name on it. Inside was a blueberry muffin and a note. Coffee break tomorrow? 6 weeks ago, this gesture would have made her heart soar. Now it merely confused her. Why the sudden interest? The answer came that afternoon. She overheard Julian talking to Thomas, the library security guard. Catherine's visit to her mother will be good for me too. Give me time to figure things out, Julian was saying. I'm not sure we want the same things. "And that new librarian does?" Thomas asked. "Annabelle's different," Julian replied. "She's uncomplicated. Catherine's always pushing me to apply for that fellowship in Boston. Annabelle seems content right here." The books in Annabelle's arms suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Uncomplicated. The word stung worse than if he'd called her boring. Is that how he saw her? A simple alternative when his real relationship hit a rough patch? She finished her shift in a fog of hurt and anger, not because she still harbored feelings for Julian, but because she'd allowed herself to be so thoroughly misread. She wasn't uncomplicated or content with staying in place. She had dreams and depths that Julian had never bothered to explore. By the time she reached her apartment, Annabelle's anger had transformed into a strange sense of clarity. She sat at her writing desk and pulled out her finest stationery, the ivory sheets her grandmother had given her for special occasions. "Dear Oscar, your letter arrived yesterday, and I found myself returning to it between tasks at the library. Yes, Harlow's is indeed the cafe I mentioned. Their almond croissants are divine, though I'm partial to their lavender honey tea as well. You asked which other poets speak to me. Langston Hughes captures the complexity of existing in America in ways that sometimes leave me breathless. I, Too, and Dreams were poems my mother recited often, reminders to persist when the world offers resistance. Today, I overheard someone describe me as uncomplicated. It wasn't meant unkindly, but it revealed how little they've truly seen me. I suspect you know what it's like to be viewed through a narrow lens, to have people see only what they expect or want to see. In your letters, brief as they've been, you've asked more about my thoughts and feelings than this person has in months of daily interaction. Strange, isn't it? How sometimes strangers can see us more clearly than those we meet every day. I find myself wondering what you're like beyond your letters. Does your voice match the thoughtfulness of your written words? Do you laugh often? What does Sunday morning look like in your world? If I'm overstepping, please forgive me. There's a freedom in writing to someone who exists for now only on paper. Yours in correspondence. Annabelle. She sealed the envelope, surprised at her own boldness. Tomorrow she would mail it before her courage failed. Oscar stood by his office window, rain streaming down the glass as he read Annabelle's latest letter for the third time. Each reading revealed new layers: her quiet defiance at being underestimated, her insights into poetry, and most surprising, her curiosity about him as a person. In the 3 weeks since this unusual correspondence began, Oscar had found himself looking forward to her letters with an eagerness that both puzzled and energized him. Their exchanges had progressed from polite acknowledgements to something deeper, discussions of literature, snippets of their daily lives, and increasingly personal reflections. Annabelle wasn't just well-read, she was perceptive and thoughtful in ways that challenged him. She didn't see him as a business success or a social connection. She saw him as a person with thoughts and feelings worth exploring. That evening, in the quiet of his penthouse, Oscar sat at his grandmother's writing desk. Rain continued to drum against the windows as he began his reply, the words flowing more easily than they ever had. "Dear Annabelle, your letter found me on a rainy Tuesday that had, until then, been filled with contracts and compromises. Your words were a welcome respite. You asked about me beyond these letters. My voice is deeper than most expect, and likely more serious. I don't laugh as often as I should, a habit formed in boardrooms where amusement is sometimes mistaken for weakness. But when something genuinely amuses me, I've been told my laugh is surprisingly boyish. Sunday mornings in my world are quiet affairs. I wake early, a habit I can't seem to break even on weekends. I read the newspaper, listen to jazz records, and yes, occasionally indulge in an almond croissant from Harlow's. Sometimes I walk through the city as it's waking up, when the streets are still quiet enough to hear birds in the park. You mentioned Langston Hughes. Dreams has long been a touchstone for me, particularly during the early years of building my company, when it seemed impossible that a man like me could succeed in these circles. Hold fast to dreams. Indeed. This may be too forward, but I find myself wanting to hear your voice, to see if it matches the warmth and intelligence I found in your letters. Would you consider meeting me at Harlow's this coming Sunday at 10 a.m.? I'll be at the corner table by the bookshelf, the one with the view of the park. If you're there, wonderful. If not, I'll understand, and we can continue our correspondence, which has already brought unexpected light to my days. Yours in anticipation, Oscar. He read over the letter, recognizing the risk he was taking. Their written exchange had been protected by the distance between them. Meeting in person would change everything, perhaps end it entirely if the reality didn't match what had developed on paper. Still, Oscar felt compelled to try. He sealed the envelope and placed it on the edge of his desk to mail first thing in the morning. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely nervous about meeting someone, not for business or social obligation, but simply for the pleasure of conversation. As he prepared for bed, Oscar realized that regardless of what happened on Sunday, Annabelle Cullow had already changed something fundamental in his carefully ordered life. Chapter 3. Words between strangers. July's sweltering heat embraced the city like a lover, wrapping its inhabitants in a humid caress that slowed movements and heightened senses. Annabelle arrived at Harlow's cafe 15 minutes early, her nerves making stillness impossible. She chose a table with a clear view of the corner nook Oscar had mentioned in his letter. The cafe hummed with Sunday morning activity, jazz playing softly in the background. Ella Fitzgerald's velvet voice singing about paper moons and cardboard seas. Annabelle ordered lavender honey tea to calm her racing heart and pulled out the book she'd brought, a collection of Langston Hughes they'd discussed in their letters. The familiar verses centered her, though her attention remained on the door. At precisely 10 o'clock, he entered. She recognized him immediately from the magazine photograph, though the image had failed to capture the quiet confidence in his bearing or the subtle intelligence in his eyes. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a casual linen suit despite the heat, Oscar Samuel carried himself with the assured grace of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. Yet there was something in his expression, of vulnerability perhaps, that the camera had never recorded. Several patrons glanced up as he entered, recognition flickering across their faces. His gaze swept the cafe until it found hers, and something in his expression shifted. Surprise, then warmth. The smile that transformed his serious features made her heart stumble in its rhythm. Annabelle stood as he approached, suddenly conscious of her simple blue sundress and the way her hands clutched her book too tightly. Annabelle? His voice was indeed deep, just as he'd described, its timbre rich with emotions she couldn't quite name. Oscar, she replied, extending her hand. It's nice to finally meet you. His handshake was firm but gentle, his palm warm against hers. The pleasure is entirely mine. I see you've beaten me here. I was eager, she admitted, then felt heat rise to her cheeks at the honesty. For the tea, I mean, they brew it perfectly here. A hint of amusement touched his eyes as he took the seat across from her. And I see you've brought Hughes. He nodded toward the book. I thought it might give us something to discuss if conversation faltered. Somehow, I doubt that will be a problem. The waitress approached, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized Oscar. Mr. Samuel, your usual? Please, Marion, and whatever my friend would like. I already have tea, thank you, Annabelle said. As Marion left, a brief silence fell between them. The easy flow of their letters suddenly seemed distant, replaced by the immediate reality of two strangers from different worlds. "This is strange, isn't it?" Oscar finally said, his honesty breaking the tension. "Getting to know someone through letters, then meeting in person. Like reading the middle chapters of a book first, then starting from the beginning." Annabelle agreed, an apt metaphor from a librarian. "Do you feel disappointed?" she asked suddenly, then wished she could retract the vulnerable question. Oscar studied her thoughtfully. "No, quite the opposite. Your letters revealed your mind. Thoughtful and perceptive. But they couldn't show me how your eyes light up when you speak about poetry, or the way you gesture slightly with your right hand to emphasize a point." Annabelle hadn't realized she was doing exactly that until he mentioned it. She laughed, relaxing a little. "And your letters didn't mention you're observant to the point of unnerving." His chuckle was indeed surprisingly warm, boyish as he'd described. A habit from business, noticing details others miss can be valuable. As his croissant arrived, their conversation flowed into discussions of books, childhood memories, and dreams. Deferred, Oscar spoke of building his company from nothing after his father's abandonment, while Annabelle shared stories of her mother's love for music and literature. "She would sing while she cooked," Annabelle said, smiling at the memory. "Aretha, Nina Simone, Billie Holiday, our apartment was never silent." "Do you sing?" Oscar asked. "Sometimes," she admitted, "though not in public." "A private talent, then?" His voice held no judgment, only curiosity. "I play piano, also not in public. My grandmother insisted on lessons, said it would give me discipline. Did it? Perhaps. Or perhaps it simply gave me a place to put emotions that had nowhere else to go." The simple honesty of his admission touched her deeply. This wasn't the calculating businessman from the magazine profile, but a man who understood loneliness and the need for expression beyond words. 1 hour stretched into 2, then 3. Their conversation ranging from politics to philosophy to favorite childhood desserts. Neither mentioned the vast differences in their lives, his wealth, her modest circumstances, the social barriers that existed in 1972 for a couple like them. In the sanctuary of Harlow's, they were simply two people discovering the person behind the letters they'd grown to treasure. As the afternoon light began to slant through the windows, Oscar reluctantly checked his watch. "I have a dinner meeting I can't miss," he said, genuine regret in his voice, "though I find myself tempted to cancel it." "The business world would survive without you for one evening," Annabelle teased. "But would I survive without hearing the rest of your thoughts on James Baldwin?" "I think not." His smile made her heart flutter. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time." "I'd like that," she replied, trying to keep her voice casual despite the joy blooming in her chest. They walked together to the door, stepping into the golden afternoon light. As they prepared to part ways, Oscar hesitated, then spoke. "Would you like to have dinner with me on Friday? There's a new jazz club on Maple Street that's supposed to be excellent." "Yes," Annabelle answered, surprising herself with her lack of hesitation. "I'd enjoy that very much." Oscar's smile brightened further. "I'll pick you up at 7 if that's convenient." "Perfect." As they exchanged details, a voice called out from across the street. "Annabelle, is that you?" They turned to see Julian approaching, surprise evident as he took in Oscar standing beside her. "Julian," Annabelle acknowledged, her voice cooling noticeably. "This is Oscar Samuel. Oscar, this is Julian Morris, my colleague from the library." Recognition flashed in Julian's eyes. "The businessman, I've seen your picture in the paper." He extended his hand, which Oscar shook briefly. "Pleasure," Oscar said, his expression revealing nothing. "I didn't know you two were..." Julian trailed off, looking between them. "Friends," Annabelle supplied. "We share an interest in poetry." Julian laughed as if she'd made a joke. "Poetry? Really?" He turned to Oscar. Wouldn't have guessed that about you. There's a great deal people don't guess about me, Oscar replied. Smoothly, Annabelle has a gift for seeing beyond the surface. The subtle praise warmed her cheeks. Well, Julian said, clearly uncomfortable, I should let you get back to your poetry discussion. See you Monday, Annabelle. As Julian walked away, Annabelle released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. So that's Julian, Oscar observed quietly. That's Julian, she confirmed, the intended recipient of my wayward letter. The man who thinks you're uncomplicated, Oscar remembered. He couldn't be more wrong. The simple validation in his words meant more than elaborate compliments from others ever had. Annabelle smiled up at him, struck by how comfortable she felt in his presence, despite the brevity of their acquaintance. Until Friday, then, Oscar said, his eyes lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. Until Friday, she echoed as she watched him walk to his car, a sleek, understated luxury sedan. Annabelle realized that their letters had built a foundation stronger than she'd imagined. Their written words had allowed them to know each other's minds before meeting, creating a connection that transcended the usual awkwardness of new acquaintances. She walked home through the summer streets, replaying their conversation in her mind. The way he listened, truly listened when she spoke, the intelligent questions he asked, the respect in his eyes when she challenged one of his opinions about Baldwin's latest work. For the first time since receiving his initial response to her misdirected letter, Annabelle allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She was falling for a man she'd never intended to meet, a man who existed worlds away from her own, yet somehow felt more familiar than anyone she'd ever known. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a curious lightness, as if she'd finally set down a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The weeks that followed transformed both their lives. Friday dinner at the jazz club led to Sunday walks in the park, weeknight phone calls that stretched past midnight, and letters that continued despite their frequent meetings, some thoughts still easier to express on paper than in person. August brought record heat and a deepening connection. Oscar found himself sharing confidences he'd never revealed to anyone. His fear that success had cost him the ability to connect with others, his doubts about his worth beyond his achievements. Annabelle confided her dreams of writing professionally someday, her struggle with being the only black woman in her library science program, her fears that she might never create something lasting. Their different worlds began to intertwine. Oscar attended a poetry reading at the library, sitting quietly in the back, his presence both surprising and gratifying to Annabelle. She joined him for a business dinner where his associates clearly wondered at his companion, but were too polite to question her presence at his side. Each encounter revealed new facets of the other: Oscar's unexpected dry humor, Annabelle's passionate defense of underfunded library programs, his talent for remembering details she mentioned in passing, her ability to see through his professional facade to the moments when he felt uncertain. One evening, walking through the park as fireflies created constellations in the gathering dusk, Oscar stopped beneath an ancient oak tree. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. Annabelle watched curiously as he withdrew a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a first edition of Langston Hughes's The Weary Blues, a treasure she'd mentioned once wanting to find. "Oscar," she breathed, running her fingers reverently over the cover. "How did you—" "I have connections with several rare book dealers," he said, watching her face with evident pleasure. "When you mentioned it was your mother's favorite collection." Annabelle looked up at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you. This means more than I can express." "You don't need to express it," he said softly. "I can see it in your eyes." Something shifted between them in that moment, a boundary dissolving, a possibility opening. By unspoken mutual consent, they began walking again, their hands finding each other naturally, fingers intertwining as if they'd done this 100 times before. It was a small gesture, one that would raise eyebrows if noticed by others. But in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Two people who had met through words on paper, now connected by touch, walking together into an uncertain but promising future. Chapter 4. First meeting. Annabelle stood before her bedroom mirror, a small pile of discarded dresses on her bed. The ivory sheath dress she wore, purchased for her cousin's wedding last year, was the finest she owned, yet even it seemed inadequate for tonight's occasion. Oscar had invited her to dinner at Le Cirque, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city where important business deals were made, and society's elite dined beneath crystal chandeliers. "This is ridiculous," she murmured, touching the gold hoop earrings her mother had left her. "He's seen me in ordinary clothes plenty of times." But this felt different. A month had passed since their correspondence had transformed into a relationship. Neither had anticipated. Their Sunday meetings at Harlow's, evening walks, and frequent phone calls had created a connection that deepened with each encounter. Yet tonight marked their first venture into Oscar's world, rather than the neutral territories they'd frequented thus far. The telephone rang, startling her from her thoughts. "Child, are you still fussing with your hair?" Her grandmother's warm voice came through the line. "That young man will be there any minute. How did you know I raised you, remember? I know your ways." The affectionate understanding in Eleanor's tone made Annabelle smile. "Now listen to me. You look beautiful in anything, but especially when you stop worrying about looking beautiful. It's just..." Annabelle hesitated. "His world is so different, Grandma." "People are people underneath all that shine," Eleanor replied. "And if he can't see past fancy restaurants and recognize the treasure you are, then he doesn't deserve your time anyway." After promising to visit Sunday for dinner, Annabelle hung up, her grandmother's wisdom settling her nerves. She finished her preparations with renewed confidence, pinning a section of her curls back while letting the rest frame her face naturally. When the doorbell rang precisely at 7, Annabelle took a deep breath and opened the door. Oscar stood, there in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a subtle contrast to his usual business attire. His eyes widened appreciatively as they took her in. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." She smiled, noticing the single yellow rose in his hand. "For you," he said, offering it. "I remembered you mentioned they were your favorite." The thoughtful gesture touched her deeply. He'd been listening, truly listening, when she spoke of small, personal things. Oscar's car, a sleek, understated luxury sedan, waited at the curb. As he held the door for her, Annabelle felt a flutter of anxiety. They'd spent hours talking in the casual atmosphere of Harlow's, but tonight they were stepping into his world, where differences between them would be more apparent. "Nervous?" Oscar asked as they drove through the city streets, the evening light casting golden hues on the buildings. "A little," she admitted. "Le Cirque isn't exactly my usual dining spot." Oscar's hand found hers, his touch reassuring. "Just remember, everyone there is just a person, no matter how they pretend otherwise. And not one of them can quote Langston Hughes from memory or discuss the merits of Zora Neale Hurston with any real understanding." Annabelle laughed, some tension easing from her shoulders. "You always know exactly what to say." "Only with you," he replied softly. "In board meetings, I'm far less eloquent." When they arrived at the restaurant, the maître d' greeted Oscar by name, leading them to a secluded table with a view of the garden. Annabelle was conscious of the glances they received. Curious, assessing, some disapproving. A black couple. In such an establishment was uncommon enough in 1972. A black couple with such an evident disparity in social status was even more remarkable. Oscar seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on her as he recommended dishes and shared stories of previous business dinners that had gone comically wrong. By the time their appetizers arrived, Annabelle found herself relaxing, caught up in the warm bubble of connection they always created together. "I must confess," Oscar said as they enjoyed their main course, "I had an ulterior motive in bringing you here." "Oh?" Annabelle raised an eyebrow, her fork pausing halfway to her lips. "I wanted to see if you'd be comfortable in these surroundings." His expression grew more serious. "My position sometimes requires attending functions in places like this. I find them tedious alone, but with you..." He smiled. "Well, they might actually be enjoyable." "Are you asking me to be your date for business events, Mr. Samuel?" Annabelle teased, though her heart raced at the implication. He wanted her in his life, publicly, not just in the private sanctuary of Harlow's or through letters. "I'm asking for much more than that, and you know it," he replied quietly. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Oscar, what a surprise finding you here on a weeknight." They looked up to see a well-dressed older white man approaching their table, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Richard." Oscar stood, his posture subtly shifting to something more guarded. "Annabelle, this is Richard Westmore of Westmore Manufacturing. Richard, this is Miss Annabelle Cullow." "Charmed," Richard said, barely glancing at Annabelle before turning back to Oscar. "I didn't realize you were entertaining tonight. Business discussion?" The implication was clear. What other reason would Oscar have for dining with a black woman at Le Cirque? Annabelle saw something dangerous flash in Oscar's eyes, but before he could respond, she placed her hand gently on his arm. "Actually, Mr. Westmore, we were discussing Christina Rossetti's sonnets," she said pleasantly. "Oscar has quite insightful perspectives on Victorian poetry. Do you read much poetry, sir?" Richard blinked, clearly thrown off balance. "I can't say that I do." "A pity. You should try it sometime. It's a wonderful way to develop empathy and understanding." She smiled sweetly, the challenge in her words veiled but unmistakable. Oscar's hand covered hers on his arm, a silent show of support. "Yes. Well," Richard cleared his throat, "I should let you get back to your discussion. Oscar, my office will call yours about those contracts." As he walked away, Oscar reclaimed his seat, looking at Annabelle with undisguised admiration. "That was masterfully done. I've had practice handling condescension at the library," she replied, "though usually with less expensive wine to help." Oscar laughed, the tension dissolving. "You are remarkable, Annabelle Cullow." "So are you," she said quietly, "for seeing me when others don't." The rest of dinner passed in a pleasant haze of conversation and lingering glances. When they finally left the restaurant, the night had turned cool, stars visible between the city buildings. Oscar draped his jacket over her shoulders, the warmth of his body still clinging to the fabric. "Would you like to walk a bit before I take you home?" he asked. Annabelle nodded, and they strolled toward the nearby park, their hands finding each other naturally now, fingers intertwining. In the quieter darkness of the tree-lined path, the city seemed to recede, leaving just the two of them. "I meant what I said earlier," Oscar said, stopping beside a small fountain, "about wanting more than just your company at business functions." "I know," Annabelle replied, "and I should be sensible. We come from different worlds, Oscar. Tonight made that abundantly clear. Do we?" He turned to face her fully. "Or do we just occupy different positions in the same flawed world? Because when I'm with you, I don't feel the difference. I just feel..." He paused, searching for words. "Understood. Known. As if I've finally found the place where I don't have to pretend." The vulnerability in his confession moved her deeply. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and built a business empire against all odds was standing before her, offering his heart with the same honesty she'd first expressed in her misdelivered letter. I feel that too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. From the first letter you sent, you saw me, not just parts of me, but all of me. Oscar's hand gently cupped her cheek, his touch reverent. May I kiss you, Annabelle? Her answer was to rise on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer simultaneously. His lips were soft against hers, his hand trembling slightly where it rested at her waist. When they parted, Oscar rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. I've imagined this since I first saw you at Harlow's, he confessed. So have I, she whispered back. Their second kiss deepened, passion rising between them like a tide. Annabelle's arms wound around his neck as his encircled her waist, drawing her closer. The world narrowed to the points where they connected. Lips, hands, bodies pressed together as if trying to bridge the space that had separated them until this night. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Oscar looked at her with wonder. I'm falling in love with you, Annabelle Cullow, he said, the words both a confession and a promise, against all logic, against all my carefully constructed plans for my life. And I've never been happier about being completely derailed. Annabelle laughed softly, joy bubbling up within her. I think I've been falling since you quoted Langston Hughes in your second letter, she admitted. Or maybe since you used the word pentameter in a sentence. Oscar smiled, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. So what happens now? Now, she said, taking his hand and placing it over her heart, we write the next chapter together. In the quiet of the park, surrounded by shadows and starlight, they sealed this promise with another kiss, deeper, more certain than before. Whatever challenges awaited them in the daylight, this moment belonged to them alone, two souls who had found each other through a simple mistake of address, now bound together by something far stronger than coincidence. Chapter 5. Worlds Apart. September arrived with golden afternoons and cool evenings, painting the city in amber hues. Annabelle and Oscar's relationship had blossomed over the 6 weeks since their first kiss in the park. They'd settled into a rhythm, Sunday brunches at Harlow's, evening walks along the river, and quiet dinners sometimes at elegant restaurants. Oscar favored, other times at the small neighborhood places Annabelle loved. But beneath the surface of their happiness ran an undercurrent of tension, small moments that highlighted the differences in their worlds. Differences that neither could ignore forever. Tonight was one such moment. The Westmore Foundation Annual Gala, Annabelle read from the embossed invitation Oscar had handed her. Black tie required. She looked up at him across her small kitchen table. This is quite something. Oscar watched her carefully. It's an important networking event. Many of my business associates will be there. He paused. Including Richard Westmore. Annabelle set down the invitation. The man who thought I was your business entertainment. All the more reason I want you there with me, Oscar said, reaching for her hand. As my date, officially. The significance wasn't lost on her. Until now, they'd kept their relationship relatively private, partly due to Oscar's naturally reserved nature, partly due to the complications that came with their different social positions. Appearing together at such a high-profile event would make a statement impossible to ignore. You're sure? She asked. I've never been more certain of anything. His dark eyes held hers steadily. I'm not ashamed of us, Annabelle. Are you? Of course not, she replied quickly. It's just, I don't have anything to wear to a black tie gala. I wouldn't know how to act or what to say to those people. You could wear a potato sack and still be the most beautiful woman there, Oscar said, bringing her hand to his lips. And you'd certainly be the most intelligent. His faith in her was touching, but it didn't erase her doubts. I don't want to embarrass you, Oscar's expression grew serious. The only thing that would embarrass me is pretending I'm not completely in love with you. It was the first time he'd said those words directly, though they danced around them for weeks. I've spent too many years playing by other people's rules, Annabelle. I don't want to do that with you. How could she refuse him when he looked at her like that? When his words made her heart feel too large for her chest? Then I'd be honored to attend with you, she said softly. His smile was worth any discomfort she might face. I'll pick you up at 7 on Saturday. After Oscar left, Annabelle sat at her table for a long time, staring at the invitation. The gala was in 5 days. She had nothing suitable to wear, no jewelry beyond her mother's modest gold earrings, no idea how to navigate a room full of the city's elite. The following day, she confided her worries to Diane over lunch at the library. "Girl, this is not a problem," Diane insisted. "It's an opportunity. Let your man buy you something gorgeous." Annabelle shook her head. "I can't ask Oscar for that." "Why not? He's got money, honey, and he wants to show you off." "That's exactly it," Annabelle sighed. "I don't want to be something he bought and showed off. I want to be me." Diane studied her friend thoughtfully. "Then be you, just in a fancy dress. Look, my cousin works at Bellamy's downtown. They have some beautiful things on clearance from last season. Let's go after work." 3 hours later, Annabelle stood before a dressing room mirror in a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk. Simple, elegant, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light when she moved. It was the most expensive dress she'd ever tried on, even at clearance price, but the moment she saw her reflection, she knew it was right. "Oscar won't know what hit him," Diane declared. Annabelle touched the delicate fabric. "I'll have to use most of my savings." "Some things are worth the investment," Diane replied. "This is one of them." Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for the outdoor portion of the gala. Annabelle was ready when Oscar knocked on her door, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon, her mother's gold earrings catching the light. When she opened the door, Oscar went completely still. For a moment, he simply stared, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "You are breathtaking," he finally said, his voice husky with emotion. Annabelle flushed with pleasure. "So are you." And he was, devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, the crisp white of his shirt emphasizing the rich tone of his skin. "I brought you something," Oscar said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. "A gift, not a requirement," he added, clearly anticipating her protest. Inside was a delicate bracelet of sapphires and diamonds that caught the light like trapped stars. "Oscar, I can't, please," he said quietly. "It was my grandmother's. She would have wanted you to have it." Understanding the significance, Annabelle offered her wrist, allowing him to fasten the bracelet. "I'll treasure it," she promised. The Westmore estate was illuminated with hundreds of lanterns, casting a magical glow over the manicured gardens where the city's wealthiest and most influential gathered in their finery. As Oscar helped Annabelle from the car, she felt eyes turning toward them, some curious, some disapproving, some simply surprised. Oscar seemed oblivious to the attention, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back as he guided her through, the crowd stopping to introduce her to various associates. Each time he presented her simply as Annabelle Cullow, my companion for the evening, his tone daring anyone to question further. Most were politely neutral, a few genuinely warm. Then they encountered Richard Westmore, their host, with a small circle of business associates. "Oscar," Richard greeted, his smile brittle. "And Miss Cullow, isn't it, from the poetry discussion?" The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. "Mr. Westmore," Annabelle acknowledged smoothly. "What a lovely event. Your gardens are exceptional." "My late wife's passion," Richard replied. "She had quite an eye for beauty." "As does your current companion," remarked an older man beside Richard, eyeing Annabelle in a way that made her skin crawl. "Where did you find this lovely creature, Oscar?" "Certainly not at the usual business functions." Oscar's posture stiffened, but before he could respond, a waiter approached with champagne. In the momentary distraction, Annabelle felt Oscar's hand tighten on hers, a silent communication of support. "Actually, we met through literature," Oscar said when the waiter departed. "Miss Cullo is a librarian with exceptional taste in poetry. She's been educating me on contemporary black poets I shamefully overlooked." The men exchanged glances, clearly thrown by Oscar's direct acknowledgement of what they'd tried to reduce to an inappropriate liaison. "How enlightening," Richard said. "If you'll excuse us, I should greet the mayor." As they walked away, Annabelle released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," Oscar said, genuine regret in his eyes. "Perhaps this was a mistake." "No," Annabelle said firmly. "I'm glad I'm here. With you." She squeezed his hand. "Let's just enjoy the evening on our own terms." They did their best, finding moments of connection amidst the superficial conversations. Oscar proudly introduced Annabelle to the few people he genuinely respected, including an elderly judge and his wife, who treated her with immediate warmth. But as the evening progressed, the accumulated weight of sideways glances and whispered comments took its toll. During dinner, Annabelle excused herself to find the powder room, needing a moment alone to gather her composure. As she was about to return to the ballroom, she overheard two women talking just outside the door. "And can't believe he brought her here. What is Oscar Samuel thinking? She's pretty enough, I suppose, but hardly appropriate for someone of his position. Thomas says it's been going on for months. Apparently he's besotted with her. Such a waste. He could have married into any family in the city. Well, it won't last. These infatuations never do." Once the novelty wears off, Annabelle didn't wait to hear more. She slipped past them, head high, despite the burning behind her eyes. She found Oscar at their table, deep in conversation with another businessman. When he saw her face, he immediately excused himself. "What happened?" he asked, drawing her aside. "Nothing I shouldn't have expected," she replied, forcing a smile. "Oscar, would you mind terribly if we left early? I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed." Understanding immediately, he nodded. "Let me get our coats." The drive back to the city was quiet, Annabelle looking out the window at the passing darkness. Finally, Oscar broke the silence. "I'm sorry for tonight," he said. "I shouldn't have exposed you to that." "It's not your fault," Annabelle sighed. "It's just reality. Your world doesn't easily accept someone like me." "My world," Oscar repeated, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "That's not my world, Annabelle. It's a world I navigate for business. It's never been where I belong." He pulled the car over to the curb, turning to face her fully. "Do you know where I feel I belong? With you. At Harlow's discussing poetry, walking in the park, sitting in your apartment while you read to me." He took her hands in his. "The rest is just circumstances, not who we are." Annabelle looked at their joined hands, her slender fingers wrapped in his stronger ones. "But circumstances shape us, Oscar. They determine what's possible. Only if we let them," he insisted. "My circumstances said a black man from my neighborhood couldn't build a company like mine. Your circumstances said a girl who lost her mother young couldn't put herself through college and build a life she's proud of. We've both already defied expectations. Why stop now?" His passion moved her, as it always did, but doubt lingered. "It's not just about us, though, is it? It's about living in a world that sees us and immediately judges what we can be to each other." Oscar was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he finally said, "and I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise that for me, you're worth whatever. Difficulties come with loving you." The simple declaration melted something frozen inside her. "Take me home," she said softly. "To your apartment?" "No." She touched his face gently. "To your home." I want to see where you live, who you are when you're alone. The significance of her request wasn't lost on him. In all their time together, she'd never seen his penthouse, the most private part of his life. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I want to understand all of you, Oscar, not just the parts that fit comfortably in my world." 20 minutes later, they stood in the private elevator ascending to the top floor of one of the city's most prestigious addresses. Annabelle's heart raced with both nervousness and anticipation. This was crossing another threshold in their relationship, seeing the space where Oscar was truly himself. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse, revealing a spacious, minimally furnished living area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering cityscape. Everything was elegant, expensive, and impersonal, like a photograph from an architectural magazine rather than a home. "It's beautiful," Annabelle said, moving toward the windows. "The view is breathtaking." "It's just a place I sleep," Oscar replied, removing his bow tie. "It's never really felt like home." Annabelle wandered through the apartment, noting the absence of personal touches. No family photos, no mementos, nothing that revealed the man who lived there. Except, she realized, for one room. The small study off the main bedroom contained a wall of books, a comfortable reading chair, and his grandmother's writing desk, which she recognized from his descriptions. This was where he kept her letters, where he wrote to her by hand in an age of typewriters and telephones. "This is the only room that feels like you," she said when he joined her. "It's where I think of you," he admitted, standing behind her. "Where I read your words and write mine." Annabelle turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for sharing this with me." "Thank you for wanting to see it," he replied. "Even after tonight." "Especially after tonight," she corrected. "I needed to remember that we're more than what others see when they look at us." Oscar's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "What do you see when you look at me, Annabelle?" "I see a man who finds beauty in poetry and strength in vulnerability," she whispered. "A man who could have anyone, but somehow wants me." His lips met hers with unexpected urgency, all the tension of the evening channeled into desire. Annabelle responded with equal fervor, her hands slipping inside his jacket to feel the warmth of him through his shirt. "Stay with me tonight," Oscar murmured against her neck. Annabelle pulled back slightly to meet his gaze. This was another threshold, one she'd never crossed with any man. But looking into Oscar's eyes, seeing the love and desire there, she knew with absolute certainty that she wanted this, wanted him. "Yes," she said simply. Their lovemaking was tender at first, Oscar treating her with reverent care, whispering reassurances as he guided her through unfamiliar sensations. But as trust overcame nervousness, their passion ignited, consuming them both in a blaze of connection that transcended physical pleasure. In Oscar's arms, Annabelle found herself completely free of doubts and insecurities. And in her embrace, Oscar finally let go of the control he maintained in every other aspect of his life. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, but within these walls, they had created a sanctuary where differences ceased to matter. "I love you," Annabelle whispered, the words falling naturally from her lips. Oscar's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, more than I knew was possible." In that moment, the worlds that had seemed so irreconcilably separate earlier in the evening merged into one. A new world they were creating together, word by word, touch by touch, moment by precious moment. Falling October painted the landscape in brilliant reds and golds as Oscar drove along the winding mountain road, Annabelle beside him, watching the scenery with quiet delight. Colorful leaves danced across their path, carried by the crisp autumn breeze. "Are you going to tell me where we're going yet?" she asked, turning from the window to study his profile. Oscar smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. It's a surprise, but we're almost there. The past month had brought them closer than either thought possible. Since the night Annabelle had stayed at Oscar's penthouse, something fundamental had shifted between them. Barriers had fallen, allowing a deeper intimacy to flourish. After another 15 minutes, Oscar turned onto a private drive lined with pine trees. As they rounded the final bend, a charming cabin came into view, nestled against the backdrop of the mountains, a small lake glittering beyond it. "Oscar," Annabelle breathed. "It's beautiful." "It was my grandmother's," he explained, parking beside. "The cabin, the only thing she owned that my father couldn't touch after she died. I've kept it exactly as she left it." Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting. Rustic wooden furniture, handmade quilts, walls lined with bookshelves. So different from Oscar's sleek, impersonal penthouse. "This feels like you," Annabelle said, running her fingers along the spines, "of well-loved books. The real you." "It's the only place I've ever felt completely myself," Oscar admitted, setting down their bags. "Until I met you." They spent the afternoon exploring the property, Oscar showing her his grandmother's garden, now wild with autumn flowers, and the lake where he'd learned to swim as a boy. As evening approached, they prepared dinner together in the small kitchen, moving around each other with easy familiarity. Over dinner before the fire, their conversation turned to the future. "I've been thinking," Oscar said quietly, his fingers playing with the stem of his wine glass. "My lease at Skyline Tower ends in December. Are you considering moving?" Annabelle asked, surprised. "I'm considering us," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "That penthouse has never been a home, just somewhere I keep my things. I want a real home, Annabelle, with you." Her heart raced at the implication. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider finding a place together," he clarified. "Not my world or yours, but something that could be ours. Maybe a brownstone in that neighborhood between the library and my office, the one with the tree-lined streets you love so much." The suggestion took her breath away. It wasn't just about sharing space. It was about creating a life together, building something permanent. "People would talk," she said, though without real concern. "People already talk," Oscar replied with a smile. "Let them. I don't care anymore." Annabelle thought about her small apartment with its overflowing bookshelves and cozy corners. She'd made it her own after her mother's death, a safe harbor during grief. The idea of leaving it stirred a momentary sadness, but looking at Oscar, at the love and hope in his eyes, she knew that home wasn't about walls and furnishings. "Yes," she said simply, "I would love to find a place with you." The next morning dawned clear and cold, the world transformed by several inches of pristine snow that had fallen overnight. After breakfast, Oscar suggested they walk down to the lake. Bundled in coats and scarves, they followed the path from the cabin to the shoreline. The scene was magical, sunlight sparkling on the snow-covered trees surrounding the small lake, its surface partially frozen near the edges. "My grandmother used to say that places hold memories," Oscar said, as they stood admiring the view. "That they absorb the joy and sorrow of the people who inhabit them." He squeezed Annabelle's hand. "I spent many happy hours here as a boy. Now I want to add our memories to this place." As they continued their walk, the conversation turned to their future together. Neighborhoods they might consider, how they would combine their possessions, how they would handle the inevitable raised eyebrows. Their relationship would continue to generate. By afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising more snow. They returned to the cabin to find the temperature inside had dropped considerably. "The heating system is old," Oscar explained, immediately moving to build up the fire. "Sometimes it can't keep up with mountain weather." After checking the furnace, Oscar determined he needed to go into town for supplies before the roads became impassable. Despite Annabelle's offer to accompany him, he insisted she stay where it was warm. "I've been navigating these mountains since childhood," he reassured her. "I'll be back before you know it." As the storm intensified outside, Annabelle busied herself exploring the cabin more thoroughly. She discovered a collection of journals belonging to Oscar's grandmother, beautiful handwritten volumes filled with observations about nature, reflections on teaching, and occasional poems. When Oscar finally returned, snow-covered and carrying several bundles, Annabelle rushed to help him. "The store was closing when I got there," he explained as they stacked firewood near the hearth. "The owner warned me this storm could last through tomorrow." After warming up with hot chocolate, Oscar grew uncharacteristically quiet. Something about his demeanor had shifted since returning, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Is everything all right?" Annabelle asked, touching his arm. "Did something happen in town?" Oscar hesitated before answering. "I ran into someone. I know, Harold Jenkins. He owns property in these mountains, has a cabin about 5 miles from here." "And?" Annabelle prompted when he didn't continue. "He's on the board of Jenkins Manufacturing, one of my company's major clients. He made some inappropriate comments about us." "About me being black? About us being together?" Annabelle asked directly. "Both," Oscar admitted. "I told him our relationship wasn't his concern, and that if he had a problem with it, we could dissolve our business arrangement immediately." "Oscar, that contract is worth millions to your company." "I don't care," he said flatly. "I won't do business with someone who disrespects you, disrespects us." The conviction in his voice was both touching and troubling. "You can't throw away business relationships because of me," she argued. "Your company employs hundreds of people who depend on those contracts." "Don't tell me what I can't do," Oscar snapped, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard it. Immediately, regret flashed across his face. "I'm sorry, that was unfair." "No, it's okay," Annabelle said quietly. "This is hard. Navigating these reactions, figuring out how to respond without letting anger consume us." As the storm raged outside, a sliver of doubt crept into Annabelle's heart. Could they really build a home together, a life together, when so many forces were aligned against them? The question followed her into uneasy dreams, where she searched for Oscar through endless snow, his footprints disappearing faster than she could follow them. Chapter 7. Walls between us. The Monday after their return from the mountains, Annabelle arrived at the library to find her world upended in unexpected ways. Mrs. Patterson, the library director, called her into her office with an unusually serious expression. "Please sit," Mrs. Patterson said, her normally warm demeanor replaced by professional detachment. Annabelle perched on the edge of the chair. "Is something wrong?" "I received a call this morning from Richard Westmore. He's chairman of our library board, as you know." Annabelle's pulse quickened. The same Richard Westmore from the gala, Oscar's business associate who had treated her with such condescension. "Mr. Westmore expressed concerns about your personal life affecting the library's reputation," Mrs. Patterson continued, clearly uncomfortable. "Specifically your relationship with Oscar Samuel. My personal life is exactly that, personal," Annabelle replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Ordinarily, I would agree completely." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. "But when board members start making noise about funding cuts, I have to take it seriously. The children's reading program you developed is on the line." The implication was clear. Annabelle's relationship with Oscar had become a liability to the institution she loved, to the children who depended on the programs she'd created. Over the next week, Annabelle gradually withdrew from Oscar. She cancelled dinners, claimed exhaustion when he suggested weekend plans, and responded to his increasingly concerned calls with brief, distracted conversations. It wasn't a conscious strategy so much as a desperate attempt to create space to think, to find a path forward that wouldn't require impossible sacrifices from either of them. 10 days after their return from the mountains, Oscar appeared at the library just before closing. Annabelle was shelving books in the poetry section when she felt his presence behind her. "You're avoiding me," he said quietly. Not a question. She turned to face him, heart racing at the sight of him. Handsome in his business suit, but with shadows under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. "Not here," she whispered, glancing around at the few remaining patrons. They walked in silence to a small coffee shop 3 blocks away. Once seated in a corner booth, away from curious ears, Oscar spoke first. "What's happened, Annabelle?" "Something changed after we came back from the mountains." She couldn't lie to him, not when he looked at her that way, with a mixture of confusion and heartache that mirrored her own feelings. "Richard Westmore spoke to my director," she admitted. "He's threatening the library's funding because of us. The children's program I've built from nothing could be eliminated." Oscar's expression darkened. "So he couldn't get to me, and now he's targeting you. I'll handle this." "No." Annabelle reached across the table to stop him from rising. "That's exactly what I'm trying to prevent. This isn't a business problem you can solve with money or influence, Oscar. It's bigger than that." "So what are you saying? That we should let people like Westmore dictate our lives? That we should give up on us?" The pain in his voice tore at her heart. "I'm saying maybe we were naive. Maybe love isn't enough to overcome the world we live in." Oscar stared at her, disbelief etched on his features. "I don't believe that, and neither do you." "Don't tell me what I believe," she snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. "I'm sorry, I need time to think, to figure out what's right." "What's right is us together," Oscar insisted. "Everything else is just noise." "It's not noise when it affects real people's lives," Annabelle countered. "Your business, my library program, these things matter too." They reached an impasse, neither willing to concede. Finally, Oscar stood. "When you're ready to fight for us instead of finding reasons why we can't work, you know where to find me," he said, his voice tight with restrained emotion. For 2 weeks, they didn't speak. Annabelle threw herself into her work, staying late at the library and volunteering for weekend shifts. She visited her grandmother, who took one look at her face and said, "You're breaking your own heart, child, and probably his too." Oscar immersed himself in business, scheduling back-to-back meetings and working late into the night. At night, he reread her letters, tracing her handwriting with his fingers as he had that very first letter, the one that had changed everything. Then came the society page of the Sunday paper. Annabelle's grandmother handed it to her without comment. During their weekly dinner, there was Oscar photographed at a charity auction with Victoria Hawkins, daughter of a prominent banking family, smiling beside him. The caption described her as his companion for the evening. 2 days later, a large envelope arrived at Annabelle's apartment. Inside was a formal letter on Samuel Industries' letterhead, announcing a substantial endowment to the city library system, specifically designated for children's literacy programs, and protected from board interference. There was no personal note, just Oscar's signature at the bottom of the document. It was both a peace offering and a statement. He had found a way to protect what mattered to her without requiring her to choose between her principles and their love. Nearly a month after their coffee shop conversation, Annabelle was working late at the library when Margaret, Oscar's secretary, appeared unexpectedly. "I'm sorry to disturb you," the older woman said, "but I thought you should know Oscar's father has appeared." Annabelle frowned in confusion. "His father? I thought he died years ago." "That's what everyone believed," Margaret explained. "Apparently, he's been living in Chicago. He's very ill now and wanted to see Oscar before—" She didn't finish the sentence. Why are you telling me this? Annabelle asked, though something in her already knew. Because he's not handling it well, Margaret said simply. And I believe you're the only person who might understand why. After Margaret left, Annabelle stood motionless among the bookshelves, her mind racing. Oscar had told her about his father, the coldness, the emotional abuse after his mother left, the final abandonment when Oscar was 17. That man had shaped Oscar's belief that vulnerability was weakness, that trust led to betrayal, and now he had returned, dying, seeking what? Forgiveness? Connection? Whatever it was, Oscar was facing it alone because she had walked away before. She could overthink it. Annabelle gathered her things and headed for the door. Some walls were built by others, some by circumstance. But the one between her and Oscar now was largely of her own making. It was time to tear it down. Chapter 8. Vulnerability. The hospital corridor stretched before Annabelle like a gauntlet. Each step toward the private room at the end felt weighted with significance. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Through the small window, she could see Oscar sitting beside a hospital bed, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. Gathering her courage, Annabelle knocked gently. Oscar turned, his expression shifting from guarded to stunned when he saw her. "Annabelle," he said, rising from his chair. "How did you—" "Margaret told me," she admitted. "We hope that's all right." Oscar glanced back at the sleeping figure in the bed. "He's been unconscious since I arrived. The doctors say it may not be long." The clinical detachment in his voice couldn't disguise the turmoil beneath. Annabelle stepped fully into the room, closing the distance between them. "I didn't come for him," she said softly. "I came for you." Something in Oscar's carefully maintained composure fractured. He reached for her hand, holding it like a lifeline. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "I've been a fool," Annabelle whispered, squeezing his fingers. "Running away instead of running toward you." They sat together by the bed, speaking in hushed tones about the past weeks. Oscar explained his father's sudden reappearance. The older Samuel was in the final stages of liver disease, with perhaps days to live. "I'm not even sure why I came," Oscar confessed. "I've hated this man for most of my life." "Because you needed to finish this chapter," Annabelle said. "To look him in the eye one last time." A sound from the bed interrupted them. Oscar's father had opened his eyes, his gaze unfocused but seeking. Oscar stiffened, years of hurt and anger visible in his expression. "Son?" The word emerged as a rasp from the older man's throat. Oscar didn't respond immediately. Annabelle felt him wrestling with emotions too complex for words. She squeezed his hand in silent support. "I'm here," Oscar finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "You came." His father's surprise was evident even through his weakness. A long silence stretched. Between them, decades of absence and pain condensed into the space of a hospital room. Finally, the older man spoke again, each word clearly an effort. "I was wrong about everything." His gaze moved to Annabelle, then back to Oscar. "Don't make my mistakes." "Which ones?" There were so many. His father didn't flinch at the bitterness. Pushing away, love, being too afraid to be vulnerable. His breathing grew more labored. "Your mother loved you. I couldn't bear it." "Why are you telling me this now?" Oscar demanded, decades of hurt evident in his voice. "Because you deserve truth." His father's gaze moved to Annabelle again. "She looks at you the way your mother looked at me before I ruined it." "I don't forgive you," Oscar said quietly. "I can't." "Don't ask it." His father's voice grew weaker. "Just be better than me." His eyes drifted closed again, exhausted by the brief exchange. Hours later, as dawn broke over the city, Oscar's father slipped away quietly, his hand held loosely in his son's. A final connection neither had expected. As the nurses came to attend to procedures, Oscar and Annabelle walked out together into the crisp November morning. "Come home with me," Oscar said, his voice hoarse from the night's emotional toll. Annabelle nodded. "Home," she repeated, the word holding new meaning after their separation. That evening, they sat in Oscar's study, the room that had always felt most like him. A fire crackled in the hearth as snow fell gently outside, the first real snowfall of the season. "I've been thinking about what my father said," Oscar began, turning a small object over in his hands. "About pushing away love out of fear. He gave you a gift in those words," Annabelle said. "Though I doubt he intended to." Oscar nodded. "My whole life has been structured around avoiding vulnerability, building walls nobody could breach, until a misaddressed letter found its way to me." He smiled at the memory. "Until you found your way to me, we found each other," Annabelle corrected gently. "Yes," Oscar took her hand, "and I never want to lose you again, Annabelle. These past weeks showed me what life is without you. Successful by all external measures, but hollow at its core." Oscar's expression grew serious. "I've been carrying this around since before our fight," he said, opening his hand to reveal a small velvet box. "I was waiting for the right moment." Annabelle's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a vintage emerald ring surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Oscar explained. "She made me promise to give it only to someone who made me feel the way my grandfather made her feel. Like home had nothing to do with place, and everything to do with person." Tears welled in Annabelle's eyes as Oscar slid from the couch to one knee before her. "Annabelle Kulo, will you marry me? Not because it's proper or expected, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Because you make me brave enough to be vulnerable, to tear down walls instead of building them. Because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "Yes," she whispered, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes, Oscar Samuel, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the emerald catching the firelight like a captured flame, Annabelle thought of that first misdirected letter, the mistake that had led to the greatest truth of her life. "What are you thinking?" Oscar asked, noticing her contemplative smile. "That sometimes the universe knows better than we do where our words should land," she replied. "That sometimes what looks like a mistake is actually the beginning of everything, right?" Chapter 9. Building Bridges. The news of their engagement spread quickly. By Christmas, Annabelle and Oscar had grown accustomed to the spectrum of reactions, from genuine congratulations to thinly veiled disapproval. What surprised them most was how little they cared about the latter. "You've changed me," Oscar told Annabelle one evening as they decorated the first Christmas tree he'd had in years. "6 months ago, I would have been calculating the business impact of every raised eyebrow." Annabelle smiled, hanging a handmade ornament her grandmother had given them. "And now I understand what actually matters." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "And it isn't Richard Westmer's opinion." Today marked an important step in their journey. Oscar was joining Annabelle for Sunday dinner at her grandmother's house. Though they'd spoken of their engagement by telephone, this would be the first formal meeting between Oscar and the woman who had raised Annabelle after her mother's death. "Are you nervous?" Annabelle asked as they walked up the steps to the modest brownstone. "Terrified," he admitted with a smile. "Your grandmother sounds formidable." "She is. But she loves fiercely and judges character, not circumstances." The door opened before they could knock, revealing a regal woman in her 70s with the same amber eyes as Annabelle. Eleanor Cullo might have been small in stature, but her presence filled the doorway. "So this is the man who's been stealing my granddaughters." Art with poetry and promises, she said, her expression stern but eyes twinkling. Grandma, this is Oscar, Annabelle began. I know who he is, child. I may be old, but I can still read a newspaper. She fixed Oscar with an appraising look. Well, don't just stand there letting the cold in. Come inside and make yourself useful. Oscar found himself conscripted to help in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, while Eleanor questioned him about everything from his business practices to his intentions toward her granddaughter. He answered honestly, without the polished responses he typically used in business settings. You own half the city, but you know how to peel a potato properly, Eleanor observed. That tells me something about you. My grandmother insisted I learn to cook, Oscar explained. Said no man should depend entirely on others for his basic needs. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Sounds like a wise woman. By the time dinner was served, Oscar had passed whatever silent test Eleanor had administered. The meal was filled with stories of Annabelle's childhood, her mother's talent for music, and Eleanor's own days as a young activist fighting for civil rights. Later, as they helped clean up, Eleanor pulled Oscar aside while Annabelle was in the other room. She's had heartbreak enough in her life, the older woman said quietly. Her father leaving when she was little, her mother dying young. I need to know you won't add to that tally. Oscar met her gaze directly. I would cut out my own heart before hurting her intentionally, he said simply. Eleanor studied him a moment longer, then nodded. You'll do, she pronounced. Now about this wedding, have you two set a date? January brought wedding plans and a search for their home. After viewing numerous properties, they found an elegant brownstone in a transitional neighborhood located perfectly between their two worlds. The house needed work, but had good bones, high ceilings, and built-in bookshelves that made Annabelle's eyes light up. It's perfect, she declared, standing in the empty living room, envisioning their future. It feels like us. Oscar watched her moving through the space, trailing her fingers along the woodwork. It does, he agreed. A place that isn't mine, or yours, but ours. That evening, as they celebrated their decision with champagne in Oscar's penthouse, the telephone rang. It was Margaret calling with news that would change their plans in unexpected ways. The Jenkins manufacturing contract has been cancelled, she reported. Harold Jenkins cited philosophical differences with the company's direction. Oscar thanked her for the information and hung up, unsurprised. Since their encounter in the mountains, he'd been anticipating this move. What he hadn't expected was his own reaction, a calm acceptance rather than the anger or concern that would have consumed him months ago. That's a significant loss for your company, Annabelle said when he explained the situation. Because of me, because of us. No, Oscar corrected her gently. Because of Harold Jenkins' prejudice, and it's not a loss I regret. He pulled her into his arms. Before you, my company was everything to me. Now it's important, but not at any cost. Not at the cost of us. The following week brought another call. This one from Mrs. Patterson at the library. The board has approved the expansion of your children's program, she told Annabelle excitedly. Richard Westmore has resigned from the board, and the new chairman is most impressed with your work. Her suspicions were confirmed that evening when Oscar revealed he'd spoken with several influential friends about the library board. You shouldn't have interfered, she said, though without real anger. I didn't interfere, Oscar clarified. I simply made sure certain people knew about Westmore's threats to cut children's programs. His replacement has a niece who benefited greatly from similar library initiatives. The rest happened naturally. February brought a revelation that shifted their wedding plans significantly. Eleanor fell ill with pneumonia, requiring hospitalization. Though she recovered, the doctor advised against any travel or excitement for several months. We'll postpone the wedding, Annabelle decided immediately. You'll do no such thing, Eleanor insisted weakly. I've waited too long to see you happy. Besides, she added with a familiar twinkle, who says I can't attend a wedding right here? In this house. 2 weeks later, in Eleanor's small living room, transformed with flowers and candles, Annabelle and Oscar exchanged vows before an intimate gathering. Eleanor, propped up in her favorite chair like a queen on her throne, beamed throughout the ceremony. Annabelle wore a simple ivory dress that had belonged to her mother, her grandmother's lace veil, and Oscar's emerald ring. Oscar wore a new suit. He'd let Eleanor help select, claiming his business armor wasn't appropriate for the occasion. I, Oscar, take you, Annabelle, as my wife, he vowed, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. I promise to cherish the passion and honesty that brought us together, to stand beside you against whatever challenges we face, and to build with you a home where love needs no explanation or defense. Annabelle's voice trembled slightly as she responded. I, Annabelle, take you, Oscar, as my husband. I promise to remember always that love is worth fighting for, to value the vulnerability we've found together, and to walk with you through a world that may not understand us, but cannot diminish what we've built. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Eleanor wiped away tears. That's how it's done, she whispered. That's love with its eyes wide open. Chapter 10. The Letters of Our Hearts, June 1973, arrived in a blaze of golden sunlight and humid air, heavy with the scent of blooming roses. 1 year had passed since a misaddressed letter had found its way to Oscar Samuel's hands. An anniversary that felt significant beyond mere coincidence. Spring had brought new beginnings. The brownstone renovation was completed just as Eleanor was finally well enough to leave her home. After much discussion, they had converted the 3rd floor into a separate apartment for her, close enough for family dinners and assistance if needed, but with independence she cherished. Annabelle stood in the kitchen of their home, morning light streaming through the windows as she prepared coffee. In the year since their unlikely beginning, they had created a space that truly reflected both of them. Oscar's appreciation for quality, tempered by Annabelle's love of comfort, their shared passion for literature evident in the overflowing bookshelves. In every room. You're up early, Oscar observed, coming into the kitchen freshly showered. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her neck. I couldn't sleep, she admitted, leaning back against his chest. Too excited. About today, Oscar smiled against her skin. Are you going to tell me where we're going yet? This mystery trip has been driving me mad all week. Patience, Annabelle teased, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. You'll know soon enough. After breakfast with Eleanor, who had blossomed in their shared home, developing a surrogate mother-son relationship with Oscar that healed something in both of them, Annabelle led her husband to the car. I'm driving today, she insisted, holding out her hand for the keys. Oscar raised an eyebrow but complied. Now I'm truly curious. Annabelle navigated the city streets with confidence, eventually turning onto roads that led to the mountains, the same route they had taken to Oscar's cabin the previous autumn. But instead of continuing toward that destination, she turned onto a smaller, less familiar road. 20 minutes later, she pulled up to a small clearing surrounded by ancient oak trees. A humble wooden mailbox stood at the entrance to a narrow path. This is it, she announced, turning off the engine. Oscar looked around, confused. What is this place? Instead of answering, Annabelle reached into her purse and handed him an envelope, cream-colored with his name written in her elegant script. Read this first, she instructed. Puzzled but intrigued, Oscar opened the envelope. My dearest Oscar. 1 year ago today, a letter I wrote found its way to you by mistake, or perhaps by some design greater than either of us could comprehend. That misdirected letter began our story, words on paper somehow bridging the distance between two souls who hadn't yet met, but somehow belonged together. Today, I want to give you something that can't be lost or misdirected. something that belongs only to us. Follow the path and discover what love has built. Forever yours, Annabelle. Oscar looked up from the letter, emotion evident in his eyes. What have you done? Come and see, she replied, taking his hand. They walked the winding path together, dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. As they rounded the final bend, Oscar stopped abruptly, his grip on Annabelle's hand tightening. Before them stood a small cottage surrounded by wildflowers and flowering shrubs. Simple, charming, with a generous porch and large windows, it emanated the same warmth as their brownstone, but with a rustic tranquility unique to the woods. "Welcome to our sanctuary," Annabelle said softly. "Our place, away from the world." Oscar turned to her, speechless for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. "I used my first royalty check," she explained, "from the children's book series." Her stories, born from the programs she'd developed at the library, had been published 3 months earlier to unexpected acclaim. The cottage had been her secret project, a gift for the man who had given her confidence to share her words with the world. Inside was a writing desk, positioned before a window overlooking a garden of roses. On the desk sat 2 items, a leather-bound journal and a small wooden box. "This is your space," Annabelle explained, "for letters, for thoughts, for whatever words need to find their way from your heart to paper." Oscar opened the box to find it filled with handcrafted stationery and a fountain pen similar to the one his grandmother had used. But it was the journal that captured his attention most fully. Opening it, he found the first page inscribed in Annabelle's handwriting, "The story of us, as told through the letters of our hearts." Beneath this title was glued the very first letter Oscar had sent her, his response to her misdirected confession. Following pages contained every letter they had exchanged during their courtship, preserved chronologically, creating a tangible history of their love. "Annabelle," Oscar whispered, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "This is..." Words failed him as he carefully turned the pages, reliving their journey from strangers to lovers to partners in life. The final letter in the collection was the one she had just given him outside. After it came blank pages, dozens of them waiting to be filled. "For all the letters yet to come," Annabelle explained, "for all the words we'll share in the years ahead." Oscar set the journal carefully on the desk, then drew Annabelle into his arms. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything he couldn't articulate, his gratitude, his wonder, his complete devotion. "I love you too," she replied, seeing and understanding all he couldn't say. "Always." Their kiss deepened, hands beginning to explore familiar paths with renewed desire. Without breaking contact, Oscar lifted her into his arms, carrying her to their new bedroom, where dappled sunlight painted patterns across the quilt. They made love with the passionate tenderness that had defined their physical relationship from the beginning. Each touch, a confession. Each kiss, a promise. Afterward, they lay entwined, Annabelle's head resting on Oscar's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her bare shoulder. "I have something for you, too," Oscar admitted, though it seems small compared to all this. From the nightstand, Oscar retrieved a small package wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with string. "I was planning to give you this tonight, at dinner, but now seems right." Annabelle unwrapped it carefully to reveal a first edition of poetry by Langston Hughes, the very collection they had discussed in their early letters. "Turn to page 43, Oscar instructed softly. She did, gasping when she discovered what lay within. Between the pages was a delicate gold chain bearing a small emerald pendant that exactly matched her engagement ring. "Read the inscription," Oscar urged as she lifted the necklace with trembling fingers. Engraved on the back of the setting were 3 simple words. Words found us. As evening approached, they walked hand in hand through the gardens Annabelle had planted around their cottage. Tomorrow would bring responsibilities and challenges, the return to busy lives in the city, but tonight belonged only to them.